fear. It's there the moment you open your eyes. It's there before every decision. It creeps in, it whispers, it tells you to wait, to hold back, to play it safe. And the truth, most people listen. They stall, they hesitate. They let fear take command. And in that hesitation, they lose. But here's the reality: fear is not destroyed by waiting. It's destroyed by action. One decisive move forward has more power than 1,000 thoughts, because fear cannot stand in the presence of execution. You want to kill fear. You want to break hesitation. You don't sit. You don't wait. You move. You decide. You execute. You crush fear under your feet with relentless action. Because fear fades, but decisive action lasts forever. Hesitation is the breeding ground of fear. The moment you pause, the moment you second guess, the moment you stand still instead of moving forward, fear begins to multiply. It starts small, a thought, a whisper, a question in your mind. What if I fail? What if I'm not ready? What if this goes wrong? And that hesitation, that split-second delay, gives fear the chance to grow roots. The longer you stand in that moment of indecision, the stronger fear becomes. What could have been a simple step forward suddenly feels like a mountain you can't climb. When you hesitate, your brain magnifies the danger. It exaggerates the risks. It builds scenarios that don't even exist. You create stories of failure in your head before you even take the first step. Fear thrives in those stories. Fear loves the silence of hesitation because that's where doubt finds its voice. And once doubt starts talking, it won't stop. It will tell you that you're not good enough, that you're not strong enough, that you're not capable. It will convince you that waiting is safer. But waiting is not safe. It is surrender. Action is the enemy of fear, but hesitation gives fear the upper hand. Think about the moments in your life where you froze. You had a chance, you had an opportunity, you had the ability, but you delayed. You waited. You hesitated. And in that hesitation, your energy shifted. Your confidence dropped. Your mindset weakened. The fire you had inside dimmed because you allowed fear to step in and take control. That's the price of hesitation. Every second you delay, you are giving fear more power than it deserves. Hesitation doesn't just stop you, it traps you. It builds a cage around you made of excuses. You start rationalizing. You say things like, I'll do it tomorrow, or I just need a little more time to prepare, or maybe later when I'm more ready. These excuses feel like logic, but they're not. They are fear disguised as reason. And every excuse you allow yourself to believe pulls you deeper into paralysis. Before long, the action you needed to take feels impossible, even though nothing about the situation has changed. The only thing that changed was you. You gave hesitation the space to grow, and it transformed into fear. The battlefield doesn't care about hesitation. The world doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Opportunities don't pause until you decide to act. They move on. They vanish. And if you're still standing there frozen, you've already lost. Hesitation is the silent killer of potential. It robs you of progress, of growth, of victory. The enemy is not always outside. It's inside. It's the voice that says, wait. And if you listen, you lose. Fear feeds off hesitation because hesitation signals weakness. When you hesitate, you are telling fear that it matters more than your mission. You are giving it validation. You are showing it respect. And fear should never be respected. Fear should be confronted. But you cannot confront anything while standing still. You cannot conquer hesitation by thinking more, planning more, or waiting more. The only way to destroy it is to move, to decide, to act. When you strike quickly, fear doesn't have time to react. When you move with speed and decisiveness, fear doesn't have the oxygen it needs to grow. But when you hesitate, you're feeding it oxygen, you're fueling the fire, you're letting it burn hotter. And once it ignites, it spreads fast. What could have been controlled with one decisive action turns into something overwhelming because you gave it time to build. That is why hesitation is dangerous. It is not harmless. It is not neutral. It is a weapon fear uses against you. Hesitation makes you a prisoner of your own mind. It blinds you to reality and chains you to imagined threats. You stop seeing the opportunity and only see the danger. You stop believing in your strength and only believe in your doubts. You stop moving forward and start standing still. And standing still is exactly what fear wants, because fear knows if you don't act, it wins. Action is the spark that sets everything in motion. It doesn't matter how small the first step is. What matters is that it's taken. The moment you act, you shift energy, you break through inertia, you interrupt the cycle of fear, doubt, and hesitation that keeps you frozen. Action creates movement, and movement builds momentum. Momentum is power. It's the invisible force that carries you forward when motivation fades and when discipline feels heavy. Without action, momentum doesn't exist. Without momentum, progress dies before it even begins. Think about pushing a heavy object. At first, it feels impossible. The weight resists, the effort seems overwhelming, and your mind tells you to stop. But the moment you apply steady force, the object begins to move, slowly at first, almost unnoticeable. And then something happens, resistance weakens, movement becomes smoother, and with each push, the effort feels easier. That's momentum. What seemed immovable suddenly becomes manageable because action was applied consistently. The same principle applies in life, in business, in training, in battle. Action generates momentum, and momentum transforms impossible into inevitable. Momentum is the antidote to stagnation. When you are stuck, it is not because you lack ability, it's because you lack motion. The mind overcomplicates everything when you're standing still. Every problem looks bigger. Every challenge feels heavier. Every step seems uncertain. But once you move, once you take that first decisive action, the perspective shifts. What looked like a mountain begins to shrink into a hill. What felt like chaos begins to find order. The clarity you were waiting for arrives not before action, but because of action. You don't think your way into momentum, you act your way into it. The power of momentum is that it multiplies effort. One action leads to another. One win leads to the next. Each step reinforces the step before it. You start stacking progress, and those small victories accumulate into strength, confidence, and belief. It doesn't take long before you realize you're not pushing as hard anymore. The momentum is carrying you. That is why decisive action is critical. The first step may be the hardest, but it is also the most important because without it, nothing else happens. Once you move, the cycle begins. Momentum does not discriminate. It works for you or against you. Positive action builds positive momentum, but hesitation and inaction build negative momentum. If you fail to act, the weight of that failure compounds. If you let fear control you once, it gets easier to let it control you again. Inaction becomes habit, and soon you're spiraling downward. But the opposite is also true. One act of courage makes the next one easier. One act of discipline makes the next one stronger. The cycle builds, and suddenly you're not just moving, you're accelerating. Action and momentum are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. Momentum cannot be planned, it cannot be wished for, it cannot be imagined into existence. It must be earned, it must be created through movement, through effort, through execution. Too many people wait for the right time to act, not realizing that time itself is neutral. Waiting doesn't create momentum. Thinking doesn't create momentum. Planning doesn't create momentum. Only action does. Momentum is also contagious. When you move decisively, people around you feel it. They are drawn to your energy, your direction, your speed. A single leader taking action can shift the mindset of an entire team. A single decisive move can inspire others to move. In that way, momentum becomes more than personal. It becomes collective. It becomes a wave that others ride with you, and that wave grows stronger the further it travels. Every great victory, every achievement, every breakthrough begins the same way, with action. Not with perfect conditions, not with total confidence, but with a decision to move. That single decision breaks the chains of hesitation and opens the door to momentum. Once momentum begins, it builds on itself, creating a force that is difficult to stop. And the longer you stay in motion, the stronger it gets, until what once seemed impossible becomes simply the next step forward. Discipline is not built in the moment of action, it is built in the moment of decision. Every choice you make carves a path. Every decision sets a standard, and those standards either strengthen or weaken your discipline. People often think discipline is about willpower in the heat of the moment, but the truth is that discipline is forged much earlier. When you decide who you are going to be and what you are going to do, the decision comes first, the action follows, and the consistency becomes discipline. When you wake up early, it's not discipline that drags you out of bed. It's the decision you already made the night before that you will not sleep in. When you stick to training, it's not some magical burst of motivation. It's the decision you made weeks, months, even years ago that you are committed to being strong, prepared, and ready. Every decision creates a contract with yourself, and every time you honor that contract, your discipline grows stronger. The opposite is also true. Every time you break that contract, every time you choose the easy way out, you weaken the foundation of your discipline. Decisions define who you are long before the results show up. When you choose discipline over comfort, when you choose work over excuses, when you choose to act instead of hesitate, you are building an identity. That identity becomes the anchor you lean on when things get hard. Discipline is not about doing what feels good. It is about doing what you decided was necessary. That's why decisions matter more than feelings. Feelings change. Decisions endure. The path of discipline is nothing more than a series of decisions stacked on top of each other. Each one may feel small, almost insignificant in the moment, but over time they build momentum and strength. The decision to train today makes tomorrow's training easier. The decision to push through fatigue builds mental toughness for the next challenge. The decision to keep your word to yourself, even when no one is watching, creates trust in your own ability to follow through. And that trust is the core of discipline. Without it, you crumble under pressure. With it, you move forward regardless of the obstacles in front of you. Every disciplined person you admire is not superhuman. They are simply decisive. They made a decision about who they are and what they stand for, and they refuse to betray that decision. They don't wait until they feel like working to work. They don't wait until they feel like leading to lead. They don't wait until they feel like enduring to endure. The decision was already made. That decision dictates their actions, and their actions compound into discipline. The danger lies in indecision. When you refuse to make a firm choice, you leave space for weakness to creep in. You tell yourself you'll see how you feel later, and when later comes, you feel tired, distracted, or unmotivated, and the opportunity is lost. Indecision destroys discipline before it even starts. But when you cut off the option of failure, when you decide with absolute clarity that you will follow through, you remove the debate. There is no argument, no hesitation, no bargaining. The decision has already been made, and all that's left is execution. Decisions define discipline because they set the standard you are willing to accept. If you decide you will settle for mediocrity, that will become your life. If you decide you will demand excellence, then every action will align with that pursuit. Discipline is nothing more than the repetition of decisions aligned with your highest standard. It is not glamorous, it is not easy, but it is simple. Decide, act, repeat. Every decision sharpens the edge of your discipline, and over time, that edge cuts through fear, doubt, and weakness. Courage is not something you are simply born with. It is something that is forged through repeated acts of execution. People imagine courage as a sudden burst of strength in the face of fear, but true courage is built brick by brick, action by action, through the willingness to move forward despite uncertainty. Every time you execute in the presence of fear, you are training yourself to be courageous. Every time you take a step when doubt tells you to stop, you are building the muscle of courage. Execution is the proving ground where courage is developed, not in thought, not in theory, but in action. Fear always exists before execution. The unknown carries weight, the risk feels heavy, and the voice in your mind questions whether you are ready. Courage is not the absence of that fear, it is the decision to act anyway, and that decision only becomes real when you execute. Thinking about acting is not courage. Talking about acting is not courage. Planning endlessly is not courage. Courage is when the plan meets the action, when the words become movement, when the thought becomes reality. Without execution, courage never leaves the imagination. The battlefield of life does not reward intentions, it rewards actions. You cannot stand still and expect to develop strength. You cannot hesitate and expect to grow courage. The fire of courage is lit when you move, when you step into the unknown, when you execute despite the shaking hands and racing heart. Each execution leaves a mark, a memory that reminds you the next time fear rises that you've been here before, that you've faced it before, and that you can face it again. This is how courage compounds, not all at once, but through repetition of execution. Execution creates evidence. Evidence that you are capable, evidence that fear does not control you, evidence that when it mattered, you stepped forward instead of backward. Courage feeds on this evidence. The more you execute, the more proof you give yourself that you can handle what comes. The stronger the evidence, the less power fear holds. Over time, fear's grip weakens because you have built a library of executed actions that prove it wrong. Without execution, all you have are theories and guesses. With execution, you have undeniable proof. Execution also forces growth. When you act, you expose yourself to failure, to setbacks, to lessons. And those lessons are what refine your courage. Each time you fail but keep moving, each time you stumble but stand back up, you are conditioning yourself to face fear again. Courage is not built in comfort. It is built in discomfort, in pain, in risk, in the willingness to confront difficulty head on. Execution drags you into that space and leaves you no choice but to grow. That growth becomes strength, and that strength becomes courage. Courage through execution is not loud or flashy. Often it is quiet, unseen, a decision no one else notices, but one that changes everything inside you. It can be as simple as starting the task you've been avoiding, speaking the truth you've been holding back, or stepping forward when everyone else hesitates. These small acts of execution, repeated over and over, shape your character. They prepare you for the bigger battles, the heavier challenges, the moments where courage is not optional, but required. What people call bravery is usually nothing more than practiced execution in the presence of fear. A soldier charging into battle, a leader making a hard decision, an individual standing against opposition. None of these acts came from nowhere. They were built through countless smaller moments of execution where courage was tested and strengthened. By the time the great challenge arrived, courage had already been forged through action. Execution transforms fear into fuel. It takes the energy of uncertainty and channels it into motion. Fear without execution paralyzes. Fear with execution becomes the resistance that builds strength. Each time you execute, you take control away from fear and give it back to yourself. Each act of execution is a declaration that you will not be ruled by hesitation, that you will not surrender to doubt, that you will face what stands in front of you. That repeated declaration becomes courage, built action by action, forged through the discipline of execution. Clarity is rarely found in waiting. It does not arrive by sitting still, overthinking, or analyzing every possibility from a distance. Clarity comes through movement, through action, through stepping into the unknown and allowing the experience itself to reveal the truth. Most people delay because they believe they need absolute certainty before they act. They believe they must have the perfect plan, the flawless strategy, the guaranteed outcome. But the world does not work that way. Certainty is earned, not given. And the only way to earn it is to act first. When you act, reality replaces imagination. The scenarios in your head, most of them exaggerated, most of them rooted in fear, are confronted by what is real. You see the challenge for what it truly is, not what your mind inflated it to be. That perspective shift only happens after action. Before action, doubt clouds vision. After action, clarity cuts through the fog. It is in execution that you discover what works, what doesn't, what needs adjustment, and what direction to take next. Without that execution, you are stuck guessing, and guessing is where fear thrives. Clarity grows with each step forward. You do not need to see the entire path before you begin. You only need to see the next step. When you take that step, the one after it becomes visible. Action reveals opportunities that cannot be seen from a distance. Momentum uncovers paths that hesitation hides. The more you act, the more information you gather, and the more precise your direction becomes. Clarity is not something you wait for. It is something you create by moving forward even when the vision is incomplete. The mind is deceptive when idle. It convinces you that waiting will bring answers, that patience alone will clear confusion. But in reality, waiting without acting deepens uncertainty. It feeds anxiety, it strengthens doubt, it gives fear time to grow. The longer you wait, the heavier the fog becomes. Only when you act does the fog begin to lift. The first move, no matter how small, is enough to cut through and bring light to what was hidden. That is the power of action. It creates the conditions for clarity to exist. Action also simplifies decisions. When you execute, you learn through feedback. You understand what is effective and what is not. That knowledge gives you sharper vision. You stop wasting energy imagining every possible outcome because you are now working with reality instead of speculation. The path becomes simpler, not because the obstacles disappeared, but because you finally see them for what they are. Clarity does not eliminate struggle, it eliminates confusion. It transforms unknowns into knowns, which allows you to move with confidence and precision. Clarity after action is not only external, but also internal. When you act, you learn about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your resilience. You discover what you can endure, what you can overcome, and where you need to grow. Those discoveries do not come from thought experiments, they come from experience. Execution reveals the truth about who you are and what you are capable of. And that self-awareness becomes another form of clarity, one that strengthens discipline and sharpens decision-making. Fear often disguises itself as a lack of clarity. You tell yourself you are waiting for the right plan, the right time, the right information. But underneath that reasoning lies fear. The solution is not more waiting, it is more acting. Because once you move, once you take decisive steps, the fear begins to shrink and the clarity you were searching for starts to appear. Action breaks the cycle of confusion and gives you direction. Direction fuels discipline, and discipline carries you forward. Clarity does not come in the beginning. It does not arrive before the risk, before the discomfort, before the decision to move. It comes after. It comes when you take the leap, when you face the resistance, when you execute even with uncertainty in your chest. Only then does the vision sharpen. Only then do the pieces fit. Only then do you see the path as it truly is. Fear loses its grip when leadership takes hold. The act of stepping forward, of placing yourself at the front, shifts the dynamic from hesitation to conviction. Fear thrives in shadows, in waiting, in looking around to see who will move first. But when you lead from the front, you eliminate that uncertainty. You set the tone. You establish the standard. You make it clear that fear will not dictate the pace, you will. Leadership in its purest form is action under pressure. And that action diminishes fear not only for you, but for everyone who follows. When you take the front, the weight of responsibility is heavy. You cannot hide. You cannot defer. You cannot pass the burden onto someone else. That pressure is what burns fear away. It forces you to act, to decide, to execute. And with each decision made, with each step taken, fear loses ground. Leading from the front requires courage, but in return, it builds confidence. The very act of standing in that position proves to yourself that you are capable of carrying the weight. Fear cannot survive long when confronted with evidence of strength. Others draw courage from your example. When you step forward, you show them it can be done. You show them the risk is survivable, the challenge is manageable, the enemy is beatable. Fear spreads quickly in silence, but so does courage in action. One decisive move at the front can ignite resolve in the entire group. The hesitation that paralyzes people begins to dissolve when they see leadership in motion. Fear fades because belief rises, and belief is contagious. Leading from the front does not just shrink your fear, it weakens the fear of those around you. Fear feeds on doubt, and doubt is strongest when no one leads. When people are left waiting, questions grow, anxiety builds, and the unknown feels overwhelming. But when a leader steps forward, doubt has less room to grow. The unknown becomes known, even if only partially, because action has begun. Movement gives shape to what was once uncertain. That shift reduces fear because clarity always follows action, and leadership is the clearest form of action. By moving first, you cut through the fog for others. Leading from the front also forces presence. You cannot afford to live in what ifs when all eyes are on you. You are required to be in the moment, focused on the task at hand, locked into execution. Fear thrives in the future, in imagined scenarios of loss and failure. But leadership drags you into the now. It demands focus on what must be done, not on what might go wrong. That presence reduces fear because it replaces speculation with action, anxiety with attention, paralysis with progress. Taking the front demands accountability. There is no place to hide mistakes, no space to pretend. Every choice is visible, every move is scrutinized. That level of exposure may feel daunting at first, but it sharpens discipline. It forces you to rise above fear because the cost of succumbing is too high. Accountability does not allow fear to dictate your behavior. You must act, and in acting, you weaken the fear that once felt overwhelming. Leading from the front transforms fear into fuel. The weight you carry pushes you to be sharper, stronger, and more decisive. The eyes watching you give you a reason to stand firm, to set the standard, to be the example. Fear may whisper in the background, but it cannot dominate because leadership leaves no room for paralysis. Every step forward reinforces authority, and with each step, fear diminishes further. Fear is loudest in the absence of leadership, but when you stand at the front, when you take responsibility, when you show others that the way forward is through decisive action, fear begins to fade. The act of leading silences hesitation. It proves that fear is not permanent. It proves that courage can spread. It proves that strength is built in the front, where the weight is heaviest and where the standard is set.